So what I'm going to tell you about here is why our Kendals, and this is true of retirement communities generally, are the optimal place to get to carbon neutrality. Why we have the opportunity to do this much more efficiently and more easily than other kinds of communities. And you may have picked up from Mary's introduction that I've been kind of harping on this theme for a while, but I hope by the time we're done here, you'll have a sense of why. And I apologize to those of you who have heard part of this presentation already at the last greening team meeting, but there is additional information this time. So in order to avoid a climate disaster, we need to get to carbon neutrality, which is no net carbon dioxide by 2050. And as retirement communities, it turns out there's a lot we can do. And I'm going to tell you about the unique characteristics that we have that should put us in the lead in this process. But before I get into those, let me tell you a little story. When back in 2015, before I moved to Kendal, I was involved in a project called Solarize Greater Media. Media is the name of the town pretty close to here that we moved from. And at the time, we were trying to get a bunch of people together to get solar panels on their roofs. And we worked very diligently to find the best installer with the best deals and work out relationships with banks, and then did a series of a dozen or so public presentations to try to sell this idea locally. And we ended up with 50 people signed up. But that was less than 10% of the people who came to our meetings and less than 1% of the homes in the area that we were targeting. But it was a success. But just signing up for a contract was only the beginning of the process. They still had to, so we had found a bank they could work with. They still had to work out with a bank for the financing. They still had to apply with the local utility, and the local utility, which was kind of anti-solar at the time, made it hard. A third of them were rejected immediately and had to appeal. We ultimately got most of those resolved. They had to work with the installer to get their roofs evaluated and installation done and so forth. And then if they wanted to, that's not what I meant. If they wanted to get paid for the excess power that they generated at certain times of the day, at certain times of the year, they had to engage a broker, and that usually meant changing electricity suppliers too, because in Pennsylvania, you get your choice of who generates your electricity. So there was a lot of work. And that was just the solar panels. Suppose we had said we wanted to get them to go to complete carbon neutrality with their houses. What would they have to do then? Well, they'd certainly have to get an energy audit. They'd probably have to beef up their insulation a lot and make their house tighter. They'd have to replace all their gas-fired appliances and maybe their doors and windows. They'd have to arrange to purchase renewable electricity for whatever electricity their solar roof was not generating, and they might need to buy an electric car as well. So I don't know what percentage we would have gotten if we were trying to do that. It would have been pretty small. So it's hard, really hard, to get your typical residential community to net zero. Everybody has to be won over, and they have a lot of work to do. Not so hard if you are trying to get a retirement community to go to net zero. You have to convince the administration, you have to convince the residents, but then you have terrific advantages. You've got the leverage with the utilities and the contractors. You can go ahead and add solar, and within your electrical system, there are very few restrictions on that, as opposed to connecting to the grid, which is what individual residents would have to do. You can upgrade your appliances and the insulation and the tightness of your dwellings as part of the routine turnover process, which might be every 10 years or less. You can get the financing you need because your administration is doing that all the time. Your facilities department knows all about your electrical grid, and so there's not a learning curve there. And increasingly, incoming residents will have electric vehicles, so that's going to be happening on its own. So we have all those advantages. But now let me take another little detour here. Our roofs have a lot of solar potential, and I want to talk very quickly about that. I looked up all of our Kendal affiliate locations in Google's Project Sunroof, which is basically a tool for evaluating individual houses to see what solar potential they have, but it has useful information for us too. It doesn't cover the whole country, only about half of affiliates are there, but let's take a look at what I found. So here is Ithaca. The bright yellow is roofs with very good solar potential. The orange is somewhat good, and the brown is possible, but you'd have to look at it carefully to see what the solar potential is there. At Ithaca, they have a ton of south-facing roofs. South is at the bottom, and you can see there's terrific solar potential here, and there are essentially no shading problems. The trees are small. Here's the Admiral, which it has limited roof space, and it's a multi-story condo building, so it's not going to be as attractive as some places, but there will be opportunities there. Here's Collington with a lot of good southwest and southeast facing roofs, especially on the larger buildings. That's true everywhere. You can see in some places, like down here, there's a clump of large trees that are making this south-facing roof brown because there's shading part of the day. But actually, shading may not be too much of a problem, because as we move to all electric heat, what we're concerned about is a peak in the middle of the winter, peak usage in the middle of the winter, and shading, if it's deciduous trees, won't be a problem then. Here's Cartmel, all individual houses at Cartmel, and you can see a lot of them have good potential. Here's Kendal on Hudson, lots of potential there. These are all apartment buildings, so there aren't the individual houses that you saw some of the other locations. Crosslands is not completely covered by the sunroof project, so you only see part of Crosslands here, but you can see that the central buildings have very good solar potential there. Solar at Longwood, where I am, you can see that the central buildings have good potential there. You can also see a lot of shading on some of the smaller roofs. That's because we have a lot of mature trees here, but again, they're mostly deciduous, and those roofs still may be okay for our purposes. Sunroof isn't everywhere. Hanover, Oberlin, Lexington, Lathrop, Coniston, none of those have been evaluated so far, and not all of Crosslands either. But you can get that information from your local installer. And don't forget, it's not just the roofs, there's parking canopies and ground-mounted solar you could use. So in case you're thinking, okay, let's go get some solar, I would urge caution. What you really need to do, you need an assessment of your current carbon footprint, because that's how you'll know when you're making progress. You can do that every few years. You'll need an energy audit, because that's how you'll know where your energy is used and where your opportunities are for saving it. And I want to make sure that people know they need to focus on efficiency first, especially in buildings. This is what Amory Lovins calls negawatts as opposed to megawatts. The watt you don't generate is the cheapest watt you'll ever have. And so focus on efficiency first, electrify everything, and then you can really benefit from solar. So if you can gain the support of your administration and a handful of your residents, you can do this. And SSAFE can help you figure it out. I'm hoping in 5 years, maybe our slogan can be, we're green, we're gray, and we're leading the way.